My impression is that Deep Rock Galactic Rogue Core enters early access as a project that took longer than anticipated, but it seems to have used that time to better define its identity. From what Ghost Ship has shown and what the alpha has revealed, it doesn't feel like a rushed spin-off, but rather a conscious effort to transform the Deep Rock Foundation into a co-op roguelite with a different pace and ambition. To me, the most interesting point of the development context is that the game started as a prototype and became a separate title because the team felt a DLC would limit the scope, systems, art, weapons, and new mechanics, while also preventing a proper early access phase. This gives off a rare sense of a studio preferring a greater creative risk over fitting an idea into a safe expansion. The way the alpha was organized also makes me more confident. Closed tests were planned in short sessions throughout Q2 and Q3, with breaks to process feedback and tweak the build before the next wave. When a studio sets up playtests like this, I tend to believe they actually want to listen, filter, and adjust the game, rather than just generating marketing buzz before launch. In the official reveals, it's clear that Rogue Core doesn't want to just copy Deep Rock with random upgrades. The proposal is to start every mission almost from scratch, build the kit during the run, significantly increase difficulty over time, and experiment with this team build concept instead of 4 isolated builds. Honestly, this seems like the right move, as it's exactly this kind of structural change that justifies a new game. The alpha footage so far reinforces this impression. Initial reactions highlighted solid performance, enemy variety, satisfying progression, and an exploration combat loop that already functions well even in an early stage. At the same time, I wouldn't ignore an important warning. These same impressions also mention moments where it isn't always clear where to go or what to prioritize, and that kind of friction carries weight in a co-op roguelite. The development context of Rogue Core gives me more confidence than doubt, as everything indicates Ghost Ship realized early on that they had an idea too good to be trapped in the old format and had the patience to let it mature. If they can preserve Deep Rock's cooperative charisma, provide more clarity to the runs, and turn alpha feedback into real changes, I think this early access looks like an encouraging start, not a game released too soon. The story seems less interested in telling a grand drama full of twists, and more focused on creating a strong motive to push you deeper into Hawks' IV, which fits the series' identity. Based on official info, everything revolves around the discovery of the mineral XP-Nite, the collapse of mining operations, and the mystery of the Greyout, with the Reclaimers being sent to reconnect lost sites and understand what caused the core to go mad. The feeling it conveys is a story that doesn't want to steal the spotlight, but wants to keep you constantly uncomfortable, as if something is always wrong behind that normal corporate mission. I like this because Deep Rock has always worked best when mixing space dwarf humor with a slightly oppressive underground threat, and Rogue Core seems to take this darker side a bit more seriously. The point that strikes me most is that the premise has more personality than depth, at least for now. The mines went dark, no one is responding, go down there and fix it is a simple but effective hook, and honestly suits a co-op roguelite better than over-explained lore right out of the gate. To me, this choice works better than trying to force a cinematic narrative into a game whose structure depends on runs, emergent progression, and team chaos. Looking at public alpha impressions, you can feel the game already provides a sense of progression and tension, even when it doesn't explain everything clearly. The loop already seemed functional and rewarding, though sometimes it wasn't clear where to go or what to prioritize, which reinforces the idea of an environmental narrative rather than an expository one. In other words, Rogue Core seems to want you to feel the collapse of the facilities before fully understanding it. I also think the story gains strength precisely because it's tied to the game format, entering the Greyout barrier, descending through procedurally generated facilities, recovering DRG equipment, and using XP-Nite for temporary upgrades during the mission. This makes the plot sound less like a tossed-in background and more like a natural excuse for the risk, improvisation, and power scaling the roguelite genre demands. When the narrative and the loop align like this, even a simple story can leave a much stronger impression. My only reservation is that I don't see signs of a memorable story in the traditional sense yet, one with striking characters or big emotional revelations. So far, the official material sells the mystery of the Greyout and the recover what was lost concept well, but it still feels like a narrative foundation waiting for more layers in early access. Since Ghost Ship says they intend to use early access to expand content over 18 to 24 months, it makes sense that this part is just beginning. My opinion is that Rogue Core's story already has the essentials: a strong hook, the right atmosphere, and a mystery that fits the type of game it wants to be. It doesn't look brilliant on paper yet, but it looks like it has high potential in execution because it has that grimy, corporate, and dangerous sci-fi energy that makes you want to go down for just one more run. And with the early access set for May 20, this is exactly the type of story I can see growing. If Ghost Ship knows how to balance mystery, atmosphere, and revelations without killing curiosity too early. Ghost Ship Games did exactly what was needed. They took the framework of DRG and stretched it to the limits of the roguelite genre. From what I've played in the alpha and followed in official materials, the decision to make a separate game instead of a DLC was the best move possible. This gave them the freedom to create weapons, synergies, and progression systems that would simply break the balance of the original game. The result is an experience that feels familiar to those who have already mined on Hox's IV, but demands a different mindset of survival and improvisation. The most drastic change I noticed in practice is how the power cycle inverts the logic of classic DRG. In the base game, you enter the cave, ready for war with your favorite loadout and pre-planned builds. Here, Ghost Ship throws you into the dark with only basic gear, and you have to scramble to extract Expedite and buy upgrades at stations during the run. This gave me a constant sense of urgency. I wasn't just shooting and exploring, I was racing against time, feeling the difficulty scale drastically with each new depth, which generates higher tension than traditional DRG missions. The new classes, Guardian, Spotter, Falconer, Slicer, and Retcon, also show that the developer wants to push players out of their comfort zones. From what I've seen, they maintain the reliance on traversal tools, like the classic ziplines, but with abilities that shine when things go wrong. The coolest part is how upgrade choices change the course of the match. In one of my alpha runs, picking up a 30% health buff from red sugar or area of effect electric damage totally changed my playstyle. It's the chaos of having to assemble your build with the pieces the game gives you, and it works well. Talking about the cooperative side, the team building idea during the match impressed me. DRG was always excellent in co-op, but in Rogue Core, upgrade choices don't just affect you, they affect how the whole team survives. One player noted that in solo alpha, options are just for them, but in co-op, the choices gain strategic weight. You aren't just thinking about your class, but how your ionized damage might combo with an ally's fire weapon in the next procedurally generated room. It's the old rock and stone cry, but now with the desperation of someone who doesn't know if the team build will hold up against the next swarm. I also liked the permanent progression between runs, which defines the game as a roguelite. Having a sense of advancement, even when you die in the third facility, lessens the frustration of losing a match. In the alpha, you can feel that this cycle of descending, dying, improving, and trying again is effective, with a variety of new enemies, like the Chorus Pawn, that don't forgive positioning errors. It's that classic reward cycle that makes you think, okay, just one more to unlock that upgrade. However, I also see that the game is still quite raw, which is natural for an alpha. Sometimes mission pacing and objectives aren't entirely clear, and you end up lost without knowing what to prioritize. The visuals and final balancing will still change a lot during early access, as the team itself warned. But the heart of the gameplay, exploring, shooting, and adapting, is already beating. Honestly, I think Rogue Core has the technical base to offer high replayability. May 20th will be the start of an interesting journey. Ghost Ship Games prove they know how to create engaging game loops, and mixing bug shooting mechanics with roguelite progression was a logical move. If they maintain the update pace and listen to community feedback on visual clarity and map rhythm, this game will take up many hours of our lives. The visual aspect is one of the most interesting points to observe, because Ghost Ship clearly wants to take a step forward compared to the original DRG while maintaining the visual soul of the base game. In the alpha, character and enemy models are already visibly more detailed, which is a positive sign for the final version. But like any alpha, there are parts clearly far from the final polish, and Ghost Ship was transparent about that. What struck me most in the first few minutes of the alpha is how the caves feel denser and more threatening than those in classic DRG. The lighting inside the facilities is much more aggressive, with flashing emergency lights, shadows that create intentional disorientation, and exponite glows that dot the environment. This works well to reinforce the feeling that you are in a collapsed place, an environment not made for survivors, which is exactly the tone a tense roguelite needs to convey. But it's not all praise. There are moments in the alpha where environments still feel repetitive, with textures repeating too much between rooms. For a game that depends on procedural generation, this visual variation will be crucial so that you don't feel like you're walking through the same corridor infinitely. The original DRG solved this well with distinct biomes over time, and it's reasonable to expect Rogue Core to follow the same path during early access. A point that surprised me positively was the design of the Coruscant enemies, which are visually more detailed than the usual glyphids. They have a more organic and infested aesthetic, with shapes suggesting the planet's core has corrupted these creatures in a way that goes beyond just being large insects in a cave. When you're in the chaos of a run and two Coruscant appear simultaneously in your peripheral vision, the visual read is clear enough that you understand the threat without looking directly at them. The combat particle effects also deserve a shout out. Explosions, bullet impacts, and class ability animations, especially the Guardians and Falconers, have good visual clarity without cluttering the screen so much that you lose track of what's happening. For a game that puts 4 players in the same tight corridor against a horde, controlling this visual chaos is a design victory. Of course, in future builds this may change, especially as more upgrade and status effects are added. One detail Ghost Ship mentioned during development was the creation of a 3D mission map, like a projected hologram, instead of the flat 2D screen from the original DRG. This shows they are concerned with the visual cohesion of the entire game, not just combat moments. It makes a difference when navigation and strategic choices have a visual treatment compatible with the game's universe, rather than a generic menu. The impression I have of the graphics is that Rogue Core is clearly in that development stage, where the intentions are visible, but the full execution hasn't arrived yet. The art direction is right. Darker, more industrial, and more claustrophobic than the original, which fits the roguelite format. The real focus will be the final polish and environmental variation during early access. If Ghost Ship Games handles this with the same dedication they had with the original DRG, the graphics will become a major draw for the game. The performance of Deep Rock Galactic Rogue Core inspires confidence for a game entering early access on May 20th. Based on public alpha impressions, the technical foundation already seems stable for this stage, and for me, that carries weight when a game relies on rhythm, co-op, and long runs. The minimum requirements also leave a positive impression. An Intel Core i5, 7th gen, or Ryzen 5 1500X, 8GB of RAM, and a GTX 970 or Radeon 290 with only 9GB of space. To me, this suggests Ghost Ship wants to maintain the original DRG philosophy of being accessible to many PC users without turning the new game into something overly heavy. Honestly, in a market full of poorly optimized games, seeing a co-op roguelite arrive with this technical profile is a good sign. At the same time, you can tell why performance will only be truly tested once early access begins. Materials from those who played indicate that Rogue Core's pace is significantly faster than classic DRG, and this acceleration naturally puts more pressure on the CPU, GPU, and general stability when the screen fills with enemies, effects, and simultaneous decisions. So my read is that the alpha looks solid, but the real test will be the chaos of co-op with more people stacking abilities and upgrades in the same run. One thing that keeps me relatively at ease is that the game already seems to have considered real early access issues like connection drops and mid-mission crashes. Testers reported that the ability to reconnect already exists if you drop or the game closes. For me, this shows a practical concern for the player experience, not just raw performance. In a cooperative roguelite, losing a long run to a technical error is usually more frustrating than dying from poor play. I also think it's important to separate two things. Stable performance doesn't mean an absence of problems, and a stable alpha doesn't mean a polished game. The alpha videos reinforce that we are looking at an unfinished build, so I would expect adjustments to frame pacing, stability on mid-range machines, and general refinement during the first weeks of early access. But the difference here is that the initial signs give more of a the foundation is ready feeling, rather than we'll fix everything later. Rogue Core looks technically more reliable than many recent early access debuts. It doesn't need to be perfect on May 20th, but it has a good chance of being playable, consistent, and having clear room to improve without feeling like a broken product. For a game that lives on fluidity and cooperation under pressure, this is a significant part of the battle won. In my view, it's worth it at launch, but only if you go in with the right mindset. This isn't Deep Rock Galactic 2, but a cooperative roguelite spin-off that aims to grow during early access. If your expectation is to pick up a game with a solid core loop and follow its expansion live, I would jump in on May 20th. If you prefer to wait for more content, more polish, and a more defined identity, I would wait for a few updates. What makes me relatively confident in an early purchase is Ghost Ship's own stance on early access. On the official site, the studio states that the difference between early access and the final version should lie more in the breadth and depth of content rather than quality, and that they want everything functional from the start. This matters because it feels like they don't want to drop a broken prototype on Steam and call it a launch. At the same time, I wouldn't buy at launch expecting a fully finished product, as the alpha material has already made it clear that there are rough edges. One playtest video explicitly highlights that the alpha build does not represent the final product, noting rough spots, unfinished visuals, bugs, and many things still subject to change. So, in my view, buying at launch makes more sense as a bet on a solid foundation rather than a purchase of a closed package. The game fits for those who enjoy 1 to 4 player co-op FPS, run-based progression, procedurally generated caves, and improvised builds. The roguelite structure of starting with basic gear and building up power and abilities throughout the mission seems to be one of Rogue Core's main features, along with permanent progression. In other words, if you enjoy repeating missions, testing synergies, and improving bit by bit, this game seems to be aiming at you. It is not indicated for players who want the exact same pace as the original DRG, anyone who avoids build RNG, or those who prefer linear campaigns and handcrafted content right away. There were even player comments suggesting that Rogue Core wants to reach a partially different audience than traditional Deep Rock Galactic, precisely by leaning harder into roguelite elements. I think this reading is correct. The game seems to demand more adaptation and tolerance for imperfect runs than the base DRG normally requires. For those who want the best time to enter, waiting for a few updates will likely be the choice. But for those who see space dwarves, procedural caves, and coordinated chaos, Rogue Core already seems to have enough personality to justify a day one entry.